Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. Today I am sharing 3 restaurant copycat recipes with you, and they were all amazing, so I cannot wait to show them to you. Let's go ahead and get into the first recipe. Alright, up first we have Cracker Barrel's meatloaf. This is my first time making this recipe and my husband absolutely loved it. So you're just going to start out by whisking together 3 eggs. I just used a fork just to get them going. And then to that you're going to add in a 1/4 cup of milk. Now the recipe called for whole milk, but I just had 2% on hand, so I used that. So feel free to substitute with whatever you have. And then to that, you're going to add in some finely diced onion. And the recipe also calls for some finely diced green bell pepper, which my grocery store actually was completely out of the day that I was shopping for this. So we just omitted it and it was totally fine. So if you like it or don't like it, you can add that ingredient. And then I'm going to add in just a little bit of salt, some ground black pepper, and then some freshly shredded cheddar cheese. And then you want to stir all of those ingredients well together to combine. And then I'm going to go in with the Ritz crackers, which is the binder. So you're going to need 2 sleeves of Ritz crackers, and I'm just using my hands and crushing them as I put them into the bowl. That was just easiest for me, so that's what I chose to do. And then I'm going to stir all of that well together. You want to make sure that you get this mixture stirred well together before you add in your ground beef, because you don't want to overwork the ground beef. It will make your meatloaf tougher and not as tender and juicy as you want it to be. So now I'm going in with 1.5 pounds of ground beef, and I'm just going to use my hands to mix all of that well together just until it's combined, and then I'm going to go ahead and stop mixing it, again not wanting to over mix the ground beef. I will have this recipe linked in the description box below, so that way you have all of the measurements, so you can always check that out if you're looking to make this recipe. And then I'm just going to form it onto a pan that I lined with parchment paper into a loaf shape. And then I kind of realized that I was a little bit close to one edge of the pan, so I ended up sliding in another like little piece of parchment paper underneath it. That way when the meatloaf is cooking and the juices are coming out, it didn't get all over that pan. So then you're going to place this into a 350-degree oven for 30 minutes. And while it's in for 30 minutes, you're going to prepare the glazed topping. And for that, it's just ketchup, brown sugar, some yellow mustard, and Worcestershire sauce. And I went ahead and mixed this, and then I decided to add some more of each of the ingredients because I know that my husband and myself, like we both love the glazed topping on the meatloaf. So I wanted to make sure that we had as much as we wanted for that. So I upped that a little bit more. I would say if you did about like 1.5 times what the recipe calls for, it would be absolutely perfect, because you're going to see in a minute I had quite a lot. But that's okay. You can never have too much of your meatloaf topping. So you're going to cook the meatloaf for 30 minutes, like I said before, and then bring it out of the oven. And then you're going to top it with a glaze, and it's going to go back in the oven for another 30 minutes or until it's cooked to 160 degrees internal temperature. And so I could have stopped right here with that glaze, but I had it, so I went ahead and just poured the rest over it. So it's going to look messy, but it was absolutely delicious. And here it is out of the oven. You can see there was a lot of that glaze on the side, but like spoon that up with your spoon when you're serving it, because it's absolutely delicious. You do not want to let that go to waste. And then I just served it with some mashed potatoes and some broccoli. So the next night we had Olive Garden stuffed shells, and I did make a little tweak to this recipe. Again, I will have it linked in the description box below. The recipe does not call for ground beef. But when we made the meatloaf and it only called for 1.5 pounds, I had 1/2 pound left over. So I decided to go ahead and brown it up and add it to the marinara sauce that goes in the bottom of the dish. That way it wouldn't go to waste. And then also I know that my husband loves like a meat sauce. So I went ahead and browned the ground beef, and then I drained off all of the excess fat. For this, I did have an 80-20 because I wanted it to have a little bit more fat when I had the meatloaf, so I needed to drain that off. And then I went ahead and seasoned the ground beef with some salt and pepper. I'm a big proponent of seasoning each step along the way, so I did that. And then you're going to add in about 1 cup of your favorite marinara sauce. So if you're making it like the traditional recipe, you would completely skip this step. You don't need to do the ground beef. You would just start with the tomato sauce or the marinara in the bottom of your pan. Now for the stuffed shells, we're going to make the filling here, and for that you just need some ricotta cheese. And then to that, I'm going to add in some shredded mozzarella and then also some grated Parmesan. And then I went ahead and just did Italian seasoning. The recipe calls for basil and oregano separate, but I just did Italian seasoning because it has both of those plus some more seasonings. And then you're going to go with some minced garlic as well. You're going to go ahead and stir that well together. I did also decide to add black pepper, almost forgot that there. And then just kind of press it along the side of your bowl, and that's going to help that to form together. It's pretty loose looking because it doesn't have an egg in it as a binder, but it does work really well in the stuffed shells. So to go ahead and make the dish, I'm just using my 8x8-inch pan, and I'm going to put the marinara sauce with the ground beef on the bottom. And then I cooked up the jumbo shells. I cooked it 2 minutes shy of what the package said. It said to cook for 14 minutes, and I just did it for 12 because it is going to be baking in the oven. And then you want to put a generous portion of that filling into each of the shells. That's why they're called jumbo stuffed shells at Olive Garden. And then we're going to cover this with foil, and I'm going to pop it into a 400-degree oven for 20 minutes. Now the recipe does say it makes 16 stuffed shells. I was only able to do 12 in my 8x8 pan. So while the shells were in the oven cooking, I went ahead and prepared our other two components. The first one is going to be some toasted breadcrumbs. So you're just going to melt down a little bit of butter in a pan and then add in some seasoned Italian breadcrumbs. You could also substitute this for panko breadcrumbs. I love panko breadcrumbs. They're just a little bit more crunchy and I love that texture. So whichever you prefer, you just want to keep an eye on it, keep them moving because they will brown pretty quickly once it gets going. Now I'm going to prepare the Alfredo sauce. So these stuffed shells have both marinara and Alfredo. And if you can, make the Alfredo homemade. It is nothing like the jarred Alfredo, but if you're in a pinch or you need something even like quicker than this is, you can use a jarred Alfredo. But what I did is I just melted down some butter and I went ahead and sauteed some garlic in it, and then I added in the heavy cream. Now here you can see there's a lot of butter like on the top of that heavy cream, even stirring it in. So I decided to add more, and I will put that note down below underneath the recipe that I used because I've made a lot of Alfredo at home. I knew that it wasn't quite right. And then you just want to let it thicken a little bit, and then you're going to add in your mozzarella and Parmesan cheese, and then we're going to be ready to assemble the dish once the sauce is smooth and has thickened. So once the shells are out of the oven, I just remove the foil, and then you're just going to ladle over some of that Alfredo sauce. Now, since I added more cream, I do think like the proportions are a little bit off in this recipe. I did not use all of the Alfredo, which was totally fine because then we had it to use another day. But just keep that in mind. Just use as much or as little as you like. I know my husband isn't the biggest Alfredo fan, so I just put a little bit on the top, and then you want to top with a tiny bit of just of the plain marinara, and then your toasted breadcrumbs. And then I pop this under the broiler just for a couple of minutes so everything can get nice and toasted and golden on top, and then it was ready to eat. The last recipe in today's video is for bourbon chicken, and I'm going to start out by making the sauce. So for that, I'm going to combine some apple juice, water, and soy sauce, along with some brown sugar, a little bit of ketchup, some onion flakes. It calls for onion powder, but I was out, so I used the onion flakes, some black pepper, and then a little bit of cornstarch. And then I used fresh ginger instead of ground, and then some fresh garlic cloves that I minced finely. And then you just want to whisk all of that together well to combine. And then for the chicken, I just went ahead and cut my chicken into about 1-inch size cubes. It does not need to be perfect. And then you're going to toss it with a tablespoon of cornstarch. And I went ahead and used chicken thighs. You can also do chicken breast. The recipe that I followed says you can use either or, and my husband wanted to try it with the chicken thighs, so that's what I used. And then I went ahead and heated up 1 tablespoon of olive oil with 1 tablespoon of sesame oil. That's where I differed from the recipe. It used 2 tablespoons of just sesame oil, but I went ahead and did half and half. And then you just want to add your chicken into the pan, and then I'm going to try to kind of break it apart as I get it into my pan, and then you're just going to toss it around, flip the pieces over, and you want to cook it thoroughly. So once it is completely cooked, per the recipe, what you're going to do is get rid of the excess liquid in the pan before we add in the sauce that we prepared. So I'm using a trick that I saw on Taylor Elmore's channel. I will link her channel in the description box, using a paper towel, and that worked really nicely. And then I went ahead and let the chicken pieces brown up a little bit more and then added in the sauce. And then you want to let this cook down. You want to bring it to a nice like simmer boil, like low boil, and let it cook down for a few minutes until that sauce gets nice and thick, until it coats the back of your spoon, which you can see here. And then it was ready to serve. So for this, I just served it over some white rice, but you can serve it however you like. This was absolutely delicious and reminds me so much of that bourbon chicken that you could get in the food court at the mall. I really hope that you enjoyed seeing these recipes today. If you haven't done so already, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up before you go too.